Welcome back to another episode of Point and Click Puzzle Games, whereby we have been on the journey for the last few videos designing a Tic Tac Toe game, and in today's tutorial we are basically going to use a random math number to determine which player 1 or player 2 goes first, but we also need to create those objects existing so that our code, or our app I should say, knows that these players exist and which one is player 1 and which one is player 2, and then we can do things like start to position their characters on the board. I do use metaphors as much as I can for explaining the sort of invisible side of coding concepts, as it were, where there's no objects to physically see, but you're actually dealing with code that's living in memory and that kind of thing. And my videos are designed for teenagers upwards, or adults that have never coded before. So let's get started. Okay, so please do subscribe, stay notified, put your comments below, please ask me any of your questions. I do dive into my YouTube channel 2 or 3 times a week to be able to reply to any comments that I have received, and I would love to know what it is that you think about my videos and what you're getting stuck with or what's working really well for you. So we're going to dive on over and get started now with our video topic today, which is creating our player, objects and random numbers. So we are literally where we left off on our last video with our app being designed. We just managed to get our events now working, so our grid knows which square we want to place a counter, but we now need to determine which player it is that's in action at the moment. So we're gonna come on down here to the beginning of our actual Lua file, and we're going to create 3 variables. The first one is for player 1. Then we're going to have another one for, obviously, as you probably guessed, player 2. But we also need a third variable, which is player's turn, okay? Because we need to know which player it is. Now, we're going to start off really easily by using a math random function, okay? And I'm going to show you where to find out more about that in a minute, but we only want to have 1 or 2 numbers left. It's either going to be player 1 or player 2, so I haven't got to worry about lots of different numbers in this case. So it's how it is designed essentially is code that's already designed in part of the Lua process. But let me just quickly go up here and type that in, and then what will happen is we will get some results, and we can bring up the API information on this math random function. So this function is part of the math library, surprise surprise, and it basically let me read it in that sense. It says it's a pseudo random number, okay? So basically it's a sequence of numbers that it creates for you. Now what we do is, as you can see down here, we've got a number, 2 different numbers that we can use. Now we've only given our number 2 because we only want one of 2 results to be returned, but we could have different arguments and things here. So it's an integer which they're calling m, which returns a number. But we can also have it from a different location as well, which is quite useful when you're using like coordinates or something. And then the examples that they've got down here, I should imagine this one on its own is like system just guessing on its own or just picking something. But essentially what you've got down here, say for example, this here with nothing in its brackets is we're going to return a number between 0 and 1. This one is going to, because nothing is essentially added, this one here we've got 10. This is going to create a number, or any number between 1 and 10. So that's essentially the example that we're using, because we just want 1 or 2 to return. But it could be, for example, that we actually need a number between 70 and 80, at which point we could define this as being the first number being 70 and not 1, and 80. And obviously here it's assumed, because we haven't got that first digit or that first parameter being passed to this function, then it's assuming that we're starting from 1. But we might not. We might say that we need a number between 10 and 20, and therefore we need to start tell it a number to start from and return from, if that makes sense. So that's how we find out more about it, and it's in part of the math library. And as you can see, there are loads and loads and loads. Floor I've used quite a lot, and ceiling are quite common ones. Minimum, maximum numbers, obviously. Random or random seed is another one. Rounding numbers up and down, square roots, all that kind of stuff. So we've got lots of different things. And I should imagine a lot of this stuff like tin, sin and all that I haven't even used since I was at school, but where you might have a reason for using it and a little bit more, but we can deal with that another day. So let's get rid of that, go back to our game. So basically now we have initialized that this is always going to have a number in it existing, and it's always going to be a value of either 1 or 2. So already straight off the cuff we've now got our game knowing if player 1 is playing or player 2. So what we could do is we can update our message now. So where we've got our message here, okay, and we've got our message options being created, what we could do is now move that and update it down here. So if you look at the message options, where we go back up here, message options, there we go, it's minimized. We've got the text as being hello world. We could change this now as part of the will show on screen. Let's come down here, find a nice place to put it. Let's minimize this to tidy up our code while we're working with it. Okay, so what we could do as part of this will show and preparing our board to come on screen is we could take the message text and update it to be something like it's player, and then we're going to leave a gap. Then we're going to put a concatenation, and then we're going to put player's turn. It's player 1's, so we need to put a concatenation, open the speech again, finish off with an S, so player 1's turn. Okay, all right, so, or it could be player 2's turn, and we're going to actually put the number because it's not it's a nice friendlier way of making the app more readable, user friendly as it were. So instead of putting hello world now, if we've got this right, so let's just go back up here and have a look. So in this text parameter of the message options, in this text we've got hello world. So technically what we're going to do is we're going to overwrite that now. So let's take that out. So the text, we have to set something, which is why we've got empty brackets now. But now we're actually going to populate it in the show will section just here with something a little bit more meaningful. So I'm going to hit save. With a little bit of luck, there we go. It's player 1's turn. So already now we're getting a much more friendlier user interface. But obviously, we need to update that when player 1 has had their turn, which they haven't yet because we're still talking, and then so on and so forth. So we still need to use this information. So we know whose turn it is. We know which grid could be clicked on. Now we need to coordinate the two of those together so that we can put the characters placer on the screen, as it were, their naught or their cross. So that's what we're going to be covering a little bit more now. So we need to actually identify a little bit more about the players. So we've got our players up here. These, where have they gone? There we go. We've got player 1 and player 2. So let's give it some more information about these guys here, because we need to create them a little bit more. Okay, so we're in the create section up here at the moment. I'm just going to very quickly type in the player 1 for the moment, and we're going to create it as a new text object that we can just then tweak and do what we want. So then physically an object exists. So new text object, there we go. And let's do the same for player 2. Now we need to give it some parameters. Okay, so for the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit because we've already got the message options sitting up here. Where are we? Message options, whereby we've got the font, the size, and all the other bits and pieces. So technically, this is already created for us. We could just create. We're going to use that now here again by passing it to these objects, and then if we need to, we can create it. So there's a couple of things extra that we need to do. Okay, so with player 1, we actually need to give it a player number, which we are going to assign the value of 1. So I'm going to copy that line and do it down here. So now each object, just in the same way that we numbered the squares and gave them an identity. We are giving the players an identity, and the reason I've used the word player number is just that I want to make sure that when we are coding we don't get ourselves lost in our own code because we've used the same reference and we're thinking the number is for the square number and not the player property instead. So that's just my way of sort of helping us understand what's going on a little bit in our code. Okay, so I'm also, just in case we need to clarify as well what's going on, I'm actually going to give this a player one dot character is let's just call it character, and I'm going to call that as in noughts, and then I'm going to copy that and we're going to do the same thing. So we've actually got we've defined player 1 is noughts and player 2 is crosses. Okay, so we've given some particular identities now to our objects as well. They're also going to need to have names. So for example, we've got player 1's turn first. Oh, sorry. So it could be player 1 dot name equals. Now for the moment, I'm going to assign it there, and I'm going to come back to it in a moment, and I'm going to put player 2 dot name equals. Now the reason I've done this is we do need to give it a string object. Now what we actually want to do is have a default setting so that if we haven't got the players picking their own names and putting them into the game, that the game is always going to be able to refer to player 1 or player 2 like we've got on screen at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the default setting here whilst we're creating the object. Okay, we're going to literally call it player 1. Okay, and we're going to do the same down here. Copy. Right, so we've actually named our objects, and the reason being is in due course we will create a field that allows our users of our app to put in their names. So for example, my name is Angela, I might want to be known as Angela instead of player 1, at which point this name here will then need to be populated by some variables that we have stored in memory. So we need to have this property existing as part of this particular object, and I've just realized I haven't just updated my code properly. There we go, to make sure there's no bugs, and so that's why this particular property exists, but for the moment we've got a default value. So what that could mean now, instead of us writing the message on the fly here that it's player 1's turn, what we need to do is we need to actually assign we've got this disconnected piece of information at the moment. The app has randomly chosen which player's turn it is, but we haven't told the player object itself that it's turn. So we've got this disconnected piece of code going on in our game at the moment, although it's physically showing on screen the right information. To fix that, we are going to just do one other thing for the moment, because I don't want any actual data being displayed on screen. I'm just going to put the visibility is visible, and I'm going to set it to false so that nothing random goes all over the screen. Let me just copy that down here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to fix that so player 2 is visible as well, because don't forget it's a text object. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to resolve this now in the next few tutorials, because what we've got to do is we've now got to develop some code that basically will store the count of our turn and our scores, and basically start telling the app whose turn it is and controlling everything. So we've just got this one little step now to do where we've got all our players existing, we've got the app knows whose turn it is but the players don't, and we've got the events taking place on the squares, so the squares know that they've been clicked on but nothing else is connected. So we need to connect characters, turns, players and events, and all 4 of those different things are going to come together in the next tutorial, which is what we're going to be covering, and basically bringing all of our logic together. Okay, so I'm going to leave it here on that video right now, because we've created our objects, we've hidden them, we've got our players, as it were. They know that they exist, they know their turn, they know their name, they know their number, and we are now going to leave it just there. We've used the random maths function as well, so the game itself knows whose turn is next, and everything else is going to come together in the next video.